All right, people are starting to join us, Steve. We'll let them roll in before we do intros and admin and get you going.
Sounds good. Can't wait.
Yes, as we were just talking about, it's crazy to me that we're on the third Tuesday of October already. Feels like this snuck up on us, but it'll be a good day, I think.
Feels like it wasn't that long ago. It was September still.
Yeah,
and then
crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for joining AHA with Amplify. We have lots of people rolling in, but while people are joining us, I'm just going to go through a couple admin items. We're very excited about today's session. Today, we're going to talk to Steve about data analytics. Obviously, this is of critical importance both for business leaders and finance leaders and really anyone in business these days. So we're excited because Steve has a very practical approach that can make it accessible to many of us. A lot of times the data analytics concept can be a bit intimidating, but the funny thing about data these days is companies are kind of in two zones, right? Either they know they have a lot of data and they know they're not using it, or they know they're not collecting data and they know what they could be using it for if they had the ability to collect it and report on it, etc. And very few of us have the privilege of leveraging data for decision making and profit each and every day. And those clients and even internally Amplify that do use data in that way really do see actual benefits in all regards: employee experience, client experience, actual profit. It's pretty powerful. And I've talked a lot about how Amplify uses data and how crazy of a difference it has made to running this company. And I'm really excited that I'm sure people within Amplify for both their client use and for internal use are going to learn something from Steve, as well as the rest of you members within your organization. So very excited about that. Before I pass the baton to Steve and get him started, I wanted to let you know about some things that are happening with AHA with Amplify. So very excited to have you as members and for you to be joining us here today. The next session, which is the third Tuesday of November, is on cyber. So obviously cyber is of critical importance. It is a session that we do every year, and every year something new is happening, and it proves that it is needed to be talked about. We've seen a lot of changes in cyber and risk over the last year. Just this morning, I saw another cyber risk that surprised me and was new to me, and it's just quite incredible. So there isn't a business leader or a finance leader that shouldn't be kept up to date on cyber, and we're excited that we have Vince Fong from Expatriate coming on the third Tuesday of November to help share some information and keep us up to date. So please make sure to mark your calendar and or register. Nikki will share the link to make sure you get your spot for the webinar in November. We take the December month off of webinars because obviously there's a lot of holiday season things going on, so we recognize that and we wait till January to return. And in January, we're very excited to have David Crawford from Aiken Henderson come and talk about indirect tax. So it'll be a really good session for business leaders and finance leaders to think about that indirect tax, which is one of the most confusing parts of the way that the government takes our money. So let's make sure that we can plan for it accordingly and be aware of what's happening in that space. So January is indirect tax. So please be sure to join David and us at AHA there. The third thing I want to mention is that October 26th is an exclusive invite for AHA members only, and you would have seen it in the AHA email that went out last week. If you need a copy of the invite and the password, please be sure to reach out to us and we'll make sure that you get that. We are pretty close to being sold out. We opened a few more seats so that we could make sure that that today, those of you that haven't gotten a seat and then you hear from me that it's available, that we can actually accommodate that. But I do expect that we'll be sold out by tomorrow or the next day. So don't hesitate, don't hold up. If you need that invite, make sure you let us know. October 26th is a live in-person session, hence why it's exclusive and there's limited seats. And we're going to be meeting here at the Edison with a great group of people. So the first fireside chat is a transaction that a client and a business affiliate underwent with one of our fractional CFOs. So there's going to be some real information about an actual transaction shared at that fireside chat. Very exciting to think about some practical success stories and some pains to get to that success. So we're excited that OT and our own Danny are going to share information there, and I'll be facilitating that chat. Then we're going to roll into a panel, and our famous ebook writers that have talked about financing for the last few years are going to join a panel to discuss financing, transactions, and the general economy. So we have Danilo from Pillar Capital, we have OT, and we have Chad from National Bank, and then myself. So very, very excited for the networking, the food, the drinks, and of course the learning. And there's very few seats left on October 26th. So be sure to let us know if you need one. So with all that admin out of the way, let's talk about data analytics because there's so much to talk about and people are excited. Steve, I'll let you introduce yourself and introduce the topic to us. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jamie. I'll just share my screen just so I get my slides going, and then we'll get things kicked off. So, like Jamie said, my name is Steve Wilkenhoff, and I am I guess a data nerd, a lack of a better way of saying it, and my passion is business intelligence and data analytics. And what we're going to talk about today is, like Jamie said, a very practical, I think a very practical approach to making sure we actually get value out of the data we have and our efforts to become data driven. So what we'll do, presentation will run 45 minutes to 50 minutes, then we'll have some questions at the end. Basically, we're going to run through what I find my three most valuable statistical functions and how you can implement. No, I'm just joking. We're no statistics, no numbers. It's actually going to be very hands-on, not conceptual, but I want to give you something at the end of this session. My goal is that you can go back to your business this afternoon or tomorrow, talk to your management team, talk to your executive team, if you do this yourself, and actually have something you can use to start to become more data-driven, irrespective of what technology you use, right? Whether you're doing business intelligence in Excel or you're using Tableau or some other software, it doesn't matter. It's what we're going to talk about is how do you take those 3 steps? What are the 3 steps? So we're going to start by reviewing sort of this promise of business intelligence. And, you know, there's many things business intelligence can do. We all know in our companies, we're awash in data. Some statistics say that the average small to mid-sized business has close to 20 different systems where they have data in different spots. And it makes sense. When we think about it, we'll have information in our accounting system these days, in our CRM system, in an ERP system. We've got data coming out of our Google ads, Facebook ads. Maybe we have Shopify, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, some sort of platform. We have data everywhere. And clearly there's value there. We know it. And harnessing it can give us some real advantages in the market. My 3 or my 5 favorite ones are that we can identify new revenue opportunities. We can improve the profitability in our companies. We can streamline operations and cut out cost. The 4th one is very important as well. Spotting problems while they're still small means we can still get our hands around them and act on them before they become runaway problems. And the biggest promise of business intelligence is that last one, improved business agility. You know, we've really seen that particularly in the last 3 to 4 years. But nowadays, you know, we have new competitors entering whatever market we're in very quickly. Things happen in the economic environment. Things happen in the political climate. And we always have to act and react in our business. And with good business intelligence, we become very agile and very facile at taking advantage of opportunities and defending against problems as they arise and those kind of things. So clearly, there's immense promise in business intelligence. The problem is, and now it's sort of that promise in air quotes, because almost every business leader, I venture to say if I polled people on this webinar, almost every one of you either has had the experience directly in your company or know somebody that has had the experience where you've spent money, you've spent time, you've tried to come up with some way of becoming data driven and harnessing, you know, let's find out what's in our data and let's get some value out of it. And the truth is, close to 70, 80% of business intelligence projects, when they survey companies, actually either fail outright or don't produce return on investment. And so we have all this data, but we don't get the new revenue opportunities, or we actually don't get to improve our profitability, or we don't streamline our operations, or we miss problems when they're small and then they get big, or we're not as agile as we want. And so the problem with that is we have this promise, and at the same time, it's so hard historically in businesses to execute on that promise. And what's interesting is business intelligence failure when it happens, either outright failure of a project that doesn't do what you thought it would, or doesn't return a good return on investment. It happens for a reason. And what's good about that for us on this webinar today is it's actually a fantastic thing, because that slide has a very important word in it. And that word is the fact that it's a reason. Notice I didn't say business failure happens for a plethora of reasons, or it doesn't happen because of many reasons, or it doesn't happen for a variety of reasons. When business intelligence failure happens, it's a singular reason, and it's that there's been a lack of impactful action. And I'll say that again. When a business intelligence project fails and doesn't deliver as we had hoped or as we had expected, or our data-driven efforts don't materialize the benefits we had hoped, it comes down to there's no impactful action. And people will often discuss and argue with me and say, well, you know, what if we went way over budget and it took a lot longer? Well, I push back and say, well, the reason those are issues is because at the end of the day, there wasn't impactful action. If there had been impactful action coming out of that effort, maybe the return on investment would have been smaller, but there would have been a benefit and that project would have been used. And impactful action really is the linchpin for business intelligence. And this is important to understand as business leaders, because as we'll talk about in a little bit in this webinar, when we talk about the 3 steps to make sure you get impactful action from your business, businesses tend to jump around and not follow the 3 steps. But before I do, I just want to sort of give you a bit of a background on, how do I know this, right? Okay, I'm presenting the webinar, so you're listening, that's great. Let me tell you a little bit about my backstory. And for years, I was a CPA back in the day. I'm old enough to when it was called a chartered accountant, so a CA. And I was a partner in a national firm. And my passion was always analytical, analyzing the financials. Previous to my CA days, I worked in investment banking as an analyst, so I was a complete egghead as far as analytics went. And I was in this national firm, and I wanted to sort of build a practice around analytics. So I actually demerged from that firm and started my own business to sort of help companies do analytics. I ended up writing a book that became a bestseller. It was all about how to analyze your customers and your products and services. And that led me to doing work for private equity firms in the UK, using the chartered accounting skills I had, or the CPA skills, and the data analytics skills, because I was working on my Master of Computer Science and Analytics. So really going down these rabbit holes of analytics. And this private equity firm came and said, we need somebody to do business intelligence analytics projects for our portfolio companies. So it was a dream opportunity. So I went in there thinking that since these were companies owned by a private equity firm, they would really have things together. I'd be doing some cool machine learning projects, that kind of thing. And the reality was a lot of those business intelligence projects were failing, right? Either I would inherit them where one of the portfolio companies had already done a project and it was failing, or the project was stalled and it was failing, or they didn't know what to do. And so they were jammed up with indecision. And as I realized the patterns that were happening, I kind of developed this idea of this framework that I now call the Actionable Insights Framework. I'm just going to pause myself for 1 second and clear my throat. There, I just didn't want to do it in everyone's ears. So the Actionable Insights Framework, again, I'm not telling you that backstory to sort of say, hey, that's very interesting. It probably is quite boring to listen to, but I want you to realize that this insights framework I'm about to show you, although it's very simple, it's not particularly easy to implement. And so when you see it, your tendency is going to be, there has to be more to business intelligence and being data driven than what I'm seeing on the screen. And the truth is there isn't. So with that warning, let's jump in and let's look at what that framework looks like. So there it is, right? Super simple. And if you do those three things, there's 3 steps, right? Step 1, we have to make sure we ask the right questions or identify the right questions when we're doing any business intelligence project and trying to become data driven. Step 2 is we have to get the right answers, right? That's a given, right? We know the questions, we need the right answers. Then we have to give it to the right people. And as business leaders, right, the right questions are actually what drives it. They're step 1 for a reason. What's interesting, and this is where this framework grew out of, is through the work I had done with well over 100 different companies, business intelligence projects. It's like this framework didn't exist. And when I started to see the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. I was seeing it in projects everywhere. And what most companies do, what most business leaders do, is we try to jump right to step 2. When we think business intelligence, when we think using our data, when we think getting data driven, we go automatically to step 2. And it's not our fault. I mean, it's completely logical. Right? We'll say things like, well, we have all this data. We got to use it for something. Let's see what we can do with it. Right? We're wired that way. We have data. We know there's value there. Let's go into step 2 and start to get some answers. You know you're in step 2 without doing step 1. First of all, is when you're having discussions around your leadership table, like many of us have had. Well, what software should be used, right? Falling into that trap of thinking business intelligence is a software issue. It's not a software issue. I have seen wildly successful business intelligence projects literally done on a spreadsheet, like one step, such a rudimentary spreadsheet. It was one step away from a recipe card, essentially. And I've also seen wildly successful business intelligence projects using whatever current software out there. But when we go to the right answers, we get stalled, right? We kind of get flustered and we're like, okay, it's a software issue. Do we use Excel? Do we use QuickSight, Click, Domo, Power BI, Tableau? And you get all this discussion around software or vendors, or then you think about, well, what skills do we need? We have all this data, but maybe it's in a database somewhere, and we need some skills to beef up the IT team to pull that data out. Or do we go hire or build these BI capabilities? Do we have to have someone build us this big data warehouse that we hear so much of? Or currently, data lake we hear so much about. And sadly, most data lakes turn into nothing but a data swamp because we're not addressing the issue. Do we outsource BI? Who's responsible for business intelligence? Is it reside in the finance team, the ops team? Is it the marketing team? Is it the IT? Do we even have budget for it? Right? This is going to cost X number of dollars. We don't know the actual use case, and so it's hard to write a check for that amount of money. Any of those situations are how you know you and your leadership team are stuck in step 2 without having gone through step 1. And again, very common. Probably 9 out of 10 companies I go in and talk to initially are right here. So again, nothing wrong with being there. It's where we go. It's where we want the best for our companies. It's where we're logically start. But you need to realize when you're there and you haven't followed the first step and you haven't followed this process. So what this process does is you takes it back a level, right? And I just want you to sort of, when you see this diagram, when you even go back to the office this afternoon or this morning or tomorrow morning, and take your management team or your leadership team and draw this up on the board. Be like, hey, is this the right system for business intelligence? And you'll be amazed at the discussions that come out of it. Because this feels highly pressurized, right? It's like, what software? Who do we do it? Those are all questions that get addressed. But you first of all have to step back, take a breath, and realize what you're trying to accomplish when you try to become data-driven, when you're doing anything in the business intelligence space. And that is, ultimately, you want to get the right questions. So what does that look like? Well, I go into these 3 steps, and in each one of the steps, there's little steps along the way that we can do. So I'm just going to move this out of the way here. One sec. There we go. Drag that out of my way. So the right questions. Well, there's 3 things to get the questions right. And it's important to understand these. And I've got a little case study we'll work through after this. So I'm going to walk you through the 3 steps, how we do each one, and then we're going to run through a little case study so you can kind of see how it applies. And what you'll notice is there's really no numbers we're doing. We're not doing any analytics today. Analytics, that's the easy part of business intelligence, to be quite honest. I mean, yes, there's some technical ability required, but it's the soft skills around business intelligence. It's the soft skills around becoming data-driven. Business intelligence, the reason most companies fail at it is they treat it as a technology issue, and business intelligence is actually a communication issue. It's all about communication, and this model forces you to have that thought process and that discussion with your leadership team. So to get to the right questions, there's 3 steps. 1, you need to identify 3 to 5 questions. That's usually how we approach with our companies. And identify 3 or 5 questions that relate to your strategic outcomes of the company or of the department if you're doing a business intelligence project for your own department. The reason that starts as the very first question is, again, business intelligence, we can do anything with it as long as the data is there. And generally, we know the data is there. It's what do we do with it? It's like having a skill set or I don't know, being able to run really fast and having nowhere to run. So the first thing we have to do is connect up our business intelligence efforts, frame it up. And in all of our companies, we know what we're trying to accomplish strategically. So what are the questions that relate to that? And then once we have that set of 3 to 5 questions, we take each one of them and we actually narrow them down further. And I call this 3-step process we're talking about, I call it question branching, and you'll see it in the case study. But we then go say, okay, each one of those questions, let's try to make it more specific. Let's narrow it down. And let's take that and tie it to what we're trying to do as a tactical goal in our business for the next 3 to 6 months. When we do this with clients, we say, you know what, let's look at the next 3 months. The reason we want to do that is right now these are what we need. These are the questions that are relevant to our next 3 months of tactical objectives that are going to tie into the strategy. We're instantly linking business intelligence and being data-driven to something that's going to drive us forward. And the beauty of that approach is it gets rid of all the things you could do, and it will narrow you down on, it's these 3 or 4 things we have to focus on. Forget the fact we have all this data. We just need this data. And so again, it self-reinforces and really keeps us focused and communicating on what matters. And then the 3rd step is make sure or rephrase each question so that it literally, as much as possible, forces action, right? There's many times, and I've come into projects after the fact and sort of when they've been stalled and people have said, come help save this project. And there'll be beautiful visualizations, fantastic analytics, and yet no one's using it or no one's logging in. Or if they do log in, they're pulling data out and doing something else to it. That is how you know you haven't got these 3 steps right. Because if you follow them, you'll just force the action. After you get the right questions, now we get the right answers. And there's 3 components of having the right answer. 1, clearly they have to be accurate, technically accurate, mathematically sound, right? And that goes without saying. But even that sometimes is hard to. This is kind of the most technical part of business intelligence. And you can always hire these skills, but sometimes, are you looking for some sort of what's an appropriate measure? Maybe it's a rolling basis. I'm looking at sales by customer by month, and it kind of blurs some issues. So I look at it on a rolling basis or a year-over-year basis. There's all sorts of technical things that matter there. But also a part of accuracy is making sure you're basing your data on granular data that includes all relevant data sources. And this is important because often in business intelligence projects, if we don't use this framework, what happens is someone will do an analysis of some type. They'll put it in front of the leadership group, and almost immediately, someone will push back from the chair and be like, that data's wrong. And what they mean is the data you're presenting doesn't square with the data I may be thinking. And most often this occurs between a finance team and an operational team or a sales team. The finance team might be looking at numbers from, an accrued revenue basis, revenue recognition basis, makes great sense. The sales leader, the VP sales or the sales manager or the sales director or the sales op manager, whoever it is, might be thinking booked sales, not rev rec, or closed deals. Both are potentially correct. And so we have to know that as leaders, when we're thinking about business intelligence, is let's pull all those data sources in so we don't have people doubting the data and thinking it's inaccurate. Then we also want to make it easy to act on. And again, this is eliminating potential or alternative interpretations. It's kind of a offshoot of the example I just gave where, someone says, well, here's what revenue or sales were, and someone interprets it. It's like, well, I don't think that's quite right. So I'm going to do my own version of interpreting what you've shown me or do some extra work on it. And it would basically leave the user unsure or dubious or confused. And this actually is probably the biggest killer of business intelligence projects, where someone will go through the effort, an IT team or an analytics team or finance team will do some sort of analytics, push it out to the business, and then it just dies on the vine. And it's because we didn't bring our users along. We didn't pull in all the data. We didn't anticipate. Remember, this is business intelligence and it's about communication. We didn't anticipate how someone else would interpret what we gave them. And so we left them open to interpretation instead of guiding them, making it clear. And then also the right answers have to be timely, right? A perfect answer 2 weeks after the decision had to be made is a useless answer. So they need to be delivered when needed so that the actions that we're targeting, remember, over the next 3 months, can be impacted. And also, we have to be able to deliver those answers with a frequency that matches that decision cadence. So sometimes people will take so long to give an answer, it's not relevant, or they'll do a bunch of work, get the answer, and then it was so much work to get that answer once that when the person needs that same data a week from now, we can't deliver it, or it's not delivered. And so they come up with their own method and they pull their own data. And now, again, we have a breakdown in communication that is business intelligence. So those are the right answers. And then last piece, we have to give them to the right people. And again, it's communication. So now I have the right answers. I need to sort of modify them and slice them and dice them and give them to the right people. And when we think right people, I like to think if there's 3 types of people we have to give information to. Clearly, the first one is the doers, right? The people that need to take the action that is going to drive us to that tactical goal, right? They need a certain set of information. If we're doing information for a sales team, the person doing the selling, the salesperson, needs different information than perhaps someone else. And that someone else is often it's the supervisor, or I call it the monitor or the champion, not the person the doing, but probably the doer's supervisor or executive team, right? They need to monitor what's going on, look at the results. How are we tracking towards achieving those tactical goals using our business intelligence and maybe doing some course corrections. And then the third one almost always gets missed, but yet it's critical. So there are people in any one of our leadership teams who have the power to create a business intelligence project if they don't believe it. Or, they might be inclined to, well, why are we spending this much money on this? I think it should be this way. And so we want to bring them along as well, too. We may never convert them to be raving fans of the business intelligence project, but we have to give them some answers as well that sort of address it. And so they're kind of like, oh, okay. So we're kind of almost preemptively getting in front of the people that could be a naysayer or to, create or kill a business intelligence project. So that's what it looks like, I guess, in words. So let's look at how does it actually look. So I'm going to run through a case study now. And it's a simple case study. It's not anything onerous or anything like that. But what I want to point out is how this process works. So let's assume step 1, in orange there, let's assume that in our business, of which we are all leaders, In this particular example, one of our strategic outcomes is to grow revenue from existing customers, right? We're going to have strategic objectives and we have a strategic plan to grow over the next 3 to 5 years. When as a management team, we roll that down. One of our outcomes is we really want to grow revenue from our existing customers. Great. So what are 3 to 5 questions? I have 3 here that kind of arise out of that naturally. And what you'll find when you bring your management team in to do one of these BI planning sessions and you ask this question, you'll get way more than 3 or 5. You'll get 10, 15, 20. And it's a fantastic thing because you'll see themes. I mean, I can bore you endlessly on methods to sort of bring those themes together because we've done it many, many, many times. But what you'll find is people will lean in. Your management team will literally get excited. And although we're doing business intelligence because we're talking strategy and we're all aligned at the hip when it comes to strategy, and you'll get all this gold coming out. So in this case study, really simple examples, right? 3 potential questions might be, how much revenue comes from new versus existing customers? Great question, right? It relates to how do we grow revenue from our existing customers? Good. How much growth potential is in our existing customer base? Yeah, another good question that relates to that outcome we want to achieve. Maybe how much does a typical customer spend with us over their life? Right? All 3 are good. If we did this as a group in 5 minutes, we'd have way better questions than that. But now you want to take one of those questions. Well, actually, we take all of them, but for the case study, we're just going to pick one. And we're just going to pick that one that you now see in orange. So we've gone from strategic outcome to brainstorming and thinking about questions that relate to that. And now we're taking one of them and we're going to go deeper on it. And then we do the same for the other 2, but we're just looking at this one. So we're going to try to figure out how much growth potential is in our existing customer base. Because we as management team think if we can figure that out, we're going to use that to grow revenue from our existing customers. So now we go one layer deeper and say, okay, how does that question that relates to our strategic objective, let's come up with 2 or 3 more narrowly focused questions that target into our tactical goal for the next 3 months. So that question branches into 3 other potential ones. And if we were around executive table, we'd have way more than 3. People will start throwing out ideas. The 3 here are, well, what customers provide an opportunity to sell additional product categories? Great. Maybe we want to know what customers have a declining year-over-year sales. Because we're trying to sell more to our existing customer base. Obviously, it goes without saying, we need to stem the tide of ones that are buying less, right? We've got to stop the bleeding before we can fix the patient. And then maybe another one is, how does each customer sales compare to their cohort? Right? Great question, because how do we know what the potential is for an existing customer? So again, all 3 good potential questions. And now we're still at that overall step of getting the questions right. So now we're going to go to that 3rd part of it. It's going to say, okay, we're going to now try to rephrase each of these questions in a way that forces action. So we're going to look at this one, what customers provide an opportunity to sell additional product categories. And how do we rephrase that to make it action-oriented, to almost force us into action? And the way we do it is, again, we could have 3 or 4 or 5, you'd have 10 different permutations of wording comes up. We're going to say, well, who are our top 50 customers with the biggest opportunity to sell additional product categories, and what are those categories? And I'm smiling as I say that because I understand it's not the most grammatically elegantly written question. And it doesn't matter because this phrasing of the question, remember, is all about driving action. So think about what we've done now. If you look at that top orange line where it says strategic outcome, we are trying to grow revenue from our existing customers. We've gone down a level and said, well, okay, a question stemming from that would be, how much growth potential is in our existing customer base? Yeah, good question. We've then gone a layer deeper and said, okay, well, what customers provide an opportunity to sell additional product categories? Good. Then we've gone to an action-oriented phrasing of that question. And we've actually put a number on it and say, look, who are our top 50 customers that we can sell additional products to, and what are those products? In any company I've ever worked with, been in, helped manage. The sales team always wants warm leads. How do we sell more? If we are leaders in this company, in this case study, and we go to our sales team and say, look, here are your 50 customers by name, and here's what they're not buying but should be, your sales team will love you. And that's actionable. How can we not give that to somebody and then them not act on it? Because we're going to ask the next time to talk to those 50 customers. The sales manager is going to want to know. So we've now taken that high level question to a very specific question. Something very powerful has happened in this process of getting the right question. From a business intelligence perspective, starting with saying, well, how much growth potential do we have in our existing customer base? Or how do we grow revenue from our existing customers? We could have given an infinite permutation of answers, of visuals, of reports. We could have pulled endless data sets to come up with that endless variety of answers. And we would have been spinning our wheels, burning through a huge amount of time and cost in a business intelligence budget, and coming up with something that may or may not have actually been actionable. Instead, by stepping back, taking those 3-step process, working the system, and getting our questions right, we have something now that if we do some business intelligence analytics to answer that question, we've got absolute gold. So now we have that question in the case study, we now have to migrate into, well, let's get the right answers. Okay, so now we have this question. Again, if we were doing this process, we'd have this times 3 or 5 source questions, so it gets wider and broader. But this is what we're going to say, okay, well, to answer that question now, how do we make sure the answers are accurate? Well, a few things. I mean, obviously, let's make sure that our total sales match the historical invoices. And again, I mean, it seems almost self-evident to say that. But again, remember, accurate answers we have all the data from all the systems. Right? Sometimes we'll find out that information is, particularly around sales, it'll often be in some sort of other billing system, or it'll be in a different report in the accounting system, or we have to pull some other information out. So we need to deal with that. And let's make sure that the sales actually match, because we don't want people to be doubting our data. We have to be working with all the data. Another common one to make sure it's accurate is dealing with multiple customer names that are actually the same customer. This one, again, very simple. I'm calling it out there because this accuracy sometimes in our business intelligence projects, it's the little things that can absolutely crater your project. And this one comes up time and time again if you're not very, very strongly aware of it. And so typically, we'll have a name for a customer in our accounting system. Generally in our CRM, whether it's Salesforce, HubSpot, Zoho, Pipedrive, whatever you're using, you'll often have that same customer, but it's actually several different names, right? Steve Wilkenhoff Ltd, Steve Wilkenhoff Limited, Steve Wilkenhoff Inc., right? It depends who wrote it down at that point in time. They may be all 3 different companies. It might be the same company. You'll often find, depending on how big your business is, you might have customers that are the same customer, but different locations, right? Steve Co. Calgary, Steve Co. Edmonton, Steve Co. Winnipeg. Well, you need to decide when we're figuring out how to get our accurate answer, are we interested in Steve Co. the customer, or are we interested in Steve Co. and the geography? Both are completely valid answers, and we probably should look at both, but we need to consciously decide so that when we're coming up with what's the potential to sell more to Steve, are we talking about Steve the company or Steve in Winnipeg? Small things, but those little leaks can really sink a business intelligence effort, because if we don't address it here and make sure our answers are accurate, by accurate meaning anticipating what might confuse or make people dubious or cause people to second guess the accuracy of our data, if we don't do that here, it's going to happen down the road, and we're going to have people making their alternative interpretations. And now we're going to have one of those awkward situations where we're sitting around our leadership table And instead of discussing the business intelligence and what we can do with it and how we're going to drive forward with it, we're having discussions about who believes the data and who doubts the data and where did the data come from. We address all those things, but not around the leadership table if we do it properly when we're using the business intelligence, when we're driving action. Again, multi-currency, fairly typical, right? I mean, is everything translated to Canadian dollars? Likely, if you're pulling out of your accounting system, you're looking at Canadian dollars. If you're pulling out of the sales ledger or a shopping cart, it could be in US dollars. Maybe you're using some sort of merchant account, Stripe or something. So again, base level issues, but they'll trip us up if we don't address them. And again, complete data set with the most granular data. And most granular data, let me just talk about that. We have a tendency when we do business intelligence to do what's easy, not what's right. And again, not our fault, we're humans, right? And so we'll do things like, oh, here's a report of sales by customer, great. Or here's a historical sales report, great. It might be the best report, but we generally want to get to the actual core data, right? And if you have an IT team, they'll often say like, well, we already have a table we've made that summarizes that. You're like, perfect. I don't want the summarized table. I actually want the table that has 1.6 million rows of line item level detail so I can see what every customer bought on every single invoice at what price point and what quantity. Business intelligence tools can handle that, right? Everything can get aggregated up. But if you don't have that most granular data, you'll be stuck and you can't go deeper. And you'll often see that when you're talking to your fellow execs around the leadership table. We're looking at a report and someone will say, wow, okay, well, what about this? And the what about this is almost always looking for more detail. And if we don't have the most granular data, we can't get to that level. And we're kind of stuck saying, well, we'll have to get back to you, or let's go check. And you kill the momentum of the business intelligence discussion. And business intelligence is about communication. And now it's like, okay, we'll address that next meeting. And guess what? Your BI project just loses steam because it's perceived as we can't use it because it doesn't give us what we want to know. But it'll give us what we want to know if we have that granular data. And again, making sure our calculations are fit for purpose, as I call it. So again, in my example, we want sales by customer, but is it by month? Is it on a rolling basis, right? Sometimes we'll see a customer that has sales upticking in the last 2 months, so we think they're actually doing well. And when you maybe a more appropriate measure is on a rolling 12-month basis, and you actually see that they're tailing down. Again, technical things, and there's endless permutations on these. None of them are absolutely correct in all cases, and none of them are absolutely wrong in all cases. It's all about being intentional. So this step, right, accuracy is more that, yes, it includes the math, but includes much more because it's accuracy of your communication. And the only way you can communicate accurately is if you have intentionally decided what you're communicating. And this is where you're deciding what you're communicating. Someone might say, I don't think we should use rolling sales when you present a report. Completely valid. However, based on the rolling sales, this is what it's saying is an easy discussion to have versus being caught flat-footed and saying, oh, well, I used rolling sales because that's what I knew. I didn't consider year over year, or what I call yo-yo, or I didn't consider sales relative to the cohort. So again, high level of intentionality here in this step, and for a reason, right? We really, really want to dial this in because we're anticipating what people might say, what they might argue with. So then we also want to make sure it's easy to act on, right? So I kind of talked about this a little bit, making sure we've anticipated the alternative interpretations. You may have never experienced this. You probably have. I've seen it. It's very common when someone does a business intelligence journey, starts the process, they'll come up with a report, and someone else will almost always say, well, can I see the data behind that? And then they'll take that data, they'll do their own thing in Excel and come back with what appears to be a different answer. Again, so we want to completely level set that and say, no, no, here's how we calculated it. And that way, if somebody goes with an alternative interpretation, it's actually an alternative calculation, which is different. Okay, well, we can both have a different calculation, but here's how we're deciding as a company what calculation we're looking at. Also explicitly disclosing sources of data. I don't know why, and I love sales teams. I've been on sales teams before in SaaS companies, so I have a true love for the sales team. But I find when it comes to business intelligence, one of the biggest doubters of data that we'll present in a dashboard tends to be the VP sales or the sales team. And the reason is because, and I alluded to it earlier, in their mindset, right, they're living in the CRM. They're calling deal pipeline, deal size, close deals, what's my forecast close rate? And so we need to really be explicitly disclose the sources so that someone knows that your data might be coming from something else, somewhere else that and again, we're level setting then. Oh, okay, well, the data is different than what I'm expecting because it's coming from someplace different. And it gets that, making the data lineage very clear, right? You want to be able to, at any point when someone says, where's that data come from? You can literally go in and say, here's the data lineage. You don't want that awkward experience we've all had where, well, someone has done some data cleaning or ETL, as we call it, extract, transform, load in Excel where there's no lineage available. And the source data has to be, something had to be done to it in Excel. And then when somebody asks, now you have to sort of try to remember and deconstruct. Again, kills momentum, kills the communication, kills the success and the flow of your business intelligence, which is all about driving action, right? And again, that clear disposition to action. So that is setting the right answer. We really, really, really want to dial that in. So now we have the questions right. Now we've taken all this time, we provided the right answers. Now it's step 3. We want to give them to the right people. I guess, but before we do that, we want to be timely. So let me just talk this slide quick. Again, it has to be delivered in time to make a decision, i.e. before the action needs to be taken. And that's generally fairly easy to do. However, what we want to make really sure is we can update that answer to match the action frequency. Again, in our example, if we're giving a list of customers and what they can buy in additional categories to our sales team, and our sales team is talking to customers every day, obviously every week, we want to be able to update that and give them a new set of 50 customers tomorrow, next week, certainly next month, right? If it takes us too long to do that, okay, well, they've talked to the 50 and they ran out, they burned through those calls today and tomorrow. Now who do they talk to? So they'll go back to their own thing. And then they'll pick up on ours when we update it a month from now, and it becomes this a chore and a hassle instead of something that's helping them drive action. So timely is very important. And like I like to say, a good answer delivered in a timely fashion that we can keep frequently updated will almost always completely blow out of the water a perfect answer that takes too long to get or is too hard to sustain. Obviously, for most businesses, I mean, if your business is something, where tolerance is 0, you're flying to space or something, that doesn't apply. But for business intelligence, a good answer is one that answers the right question. You want one that you can deliver on a speed that matches the speed of the business. And then you want to move into getting the right answers to the right people. Right? So now we've done all this work. And this is the easiest part. So again, business intelligence universe, we've done the calculations. Now we're going to build a dashboard or a report and give it to somebody. But again, there's 3 types of somebodies. So the first one we want to give it something to is give it to the doers, right? In our example of the top 50 customers that can buy additional categories and what those categories are, well, clearly we want to give our sales team a customer list. But we want to think it's communication. We want it to be as clear as possible, not a customer list that's coming out of the accounting system. We want to match that customer list to what they're going to see in their day-to-day job in their CRM. So maybe we have to do a little bit of translation. We got calculations and then we sort of deconstruct it back to the customer names. we have to anticipate and walk the walk with them if we want our business intelligence to be successful and have the communication powerful and drive action, right? Category definitions, let's make them explicit. You know, your sales team might think in a certain cadence. I have a hospital market and I have an industrial market, making that up. And maybe in the report, we've just changed that to be oil and gas market and manufacturing. Well, they don't really know which one that is. They can, yeah, we kind of think they'll know, but no, rename it and reframe it to match what they're doing. They're the doer. We're delivering communication that helps them take action to drive results. We owe it to them to give it to them in a way that makes their job easy. If not, they become dubious, they become doubtful, we slow them down, and the project loses momentum, and we'll be one of those 80% of companies that don't fulfill on our business intelligence promise. Right? You know, other measures, what categories are they not buying? Make it easy. Don't give them a chart with numbers. Yes, you can do that, but literally, I call it a checkerboard. It's like customer name, 4 categories if there's 4, and which ones are red. Like they can see at a glance, oh, that customer's not buying this category. Communicate, make it easy. These are the doers. These are the ones that are going to achieve the tactical goal on the ground. Give them the equipment and the tools they need. Then let's talk about supervisors. So again, supervisors are part of the right people. Let's identify them by name as well. Who are they? You know, maybe they need to see total sales by category. And maybe they need to see a customer list that shows what's the gap relative to the peer group of all of our customers. Maybe we break it down into industry or geography or by salesperson. Again, they're going to have a different type of report and a different type of information we're giving them because they're not the one making the sales call. They're supervising, they're monitoring, they're course correcting, they're coaching. So we want to give them a different thing. One size does not fit all in business intelligence. And when we do it well, it's totally fine because it's actually really easy to give the 3 different people the information and the answers they need from the same underlying data set. Sorry, I had to clear my throat once more so I didn't go Marge Simpson on all of us. So that's the supervisors. And then the last one is, you know, let's talk about the people that can, I call them neutralizers. Right? These are the people that can cause friction in your business intelligence project. If it's a project underway, they probably can't kill it, but you don't want the people that are like continual naysayers. Well, I told you this wouldn't work. Oh, well, you know, these business intelligence projects, they never pan out. Like we've all had people like that. We probably do have people like that in our businesses, probably around our management table. There's always one, sometimes 2, not their fault, right? If you have people in your business that are feeling that way, that are making those comments, and you're in charge of your business intelligence, guess whose fault it is? It's your fault because they're saying those things because you didn't communicate as is your obligation to communicate to them in a way that actually brings them on side, lets them know what's going on. So maybe they just want to say, hey, you know what? Let's show them the total sales pipeline. They can see how big it's growing. Maybe we can show them growth in sales by category. They don't need a lot of detail, but you know, maybe around the management table, it's like, well, look, things are happening. Sales are growing in our existing customer base. So you're giving them something to sort of just settle them down and take away on a gentle basis. We're giving them something hopefully will bring them alongside and get them excited. It happens. If it's someone who will always tend to look for the negative, you're just preempting them and saying, look, here's the data. I know you think this isn't a good idea, but this is what we're seeing in the results from what we've been doing. You just lay it out there in communication. And now you've got them at least alongside you, not arms crossed like this, where they're, and if they are arms crossed like that, looking negatively, you've given them the information. And so you've also stolen their power to taint other people around your management table by sort of chipping in the background or chirping in the background about how this really isn't maybe something you should be doing because you've given them this information. Other people have probably seen the information and you're sort of, you know, you're preemptively defending against that. So again, just to wrap up, so business intelligence, there literally are 3 steps to get impactful action from your business. And the math and the numbers and the calculations are only a small part, right? 3 big steps, and there were 3 little dimensions in each one of those. So 9 things in total to do. Only 1 or 2 of them actually relate to crunching the numbers. Where you want to focus when you talk to your company, you talk to your management team, when you're doing business intelligence, again, whether it's in Excel, whether it's in Power BI, whatever tool it is, spend your time getting the questions right. If you take the time to do that, you'll get dramatically better results from your business intelligence. You'll also get dramatically better teamwork from your management team because you'll be bringing in all of their ideas. This isn't just an IT project or a finance project or a BI project. It's something that they're all can align behind because they all want the company to achieve its strategic objectives. This is simply a tool to help us do that, us as a team. Then you provide the right answers. Remember, right answers have to be accurate, they have to be easy to understand, easy to use, and they have to be timely, right? Perfect answer given late is not a perfect answer at all. And then we have to give them to the right people, right? The doers, the monitors and supervisors, and the neutralizers. And if you do those things, like business intelligence almost happens in spite of itself. And that's what I will often tell people. I've worked with clients in all sorts of different tech stacks because business intelligence is about approach. It's not about technology. And if you think it's about technology, not your fault, because the industry tries to convince us that we need to buy yet one more BI tool. And the reality is, it's all in your approach. People did business intelligence for years before. They would put things on a whiteboard, right? In the old days, like I say, I mean, I was an accountant when chartered accountant was still a thing. So I remember that. So business intelligence is approach. It's not technology. So that's the kind of wrap up. I guess we can take questions now. I'm more than happy to take questions. If you have any questions, if you have any questions, going back, try to talk to your management team. Ping me. There's my email. There's the website. Ping me on LinkedIn is fine too. I'm clearly a nerd about this stuff, so I will talk your ear off probably until you just outright tell me to stop talking because I would go on forever.
I love it. Thank you for that, Steve. I like those three steps to get you rolling when it comes to data analytics. I think that helps a lot. So we do have some questions, and I encourage everyone to include their questions on the chat, and we'll make sure that we address as many as we can. But a few to start. You talked about it a bit, but I just want to dig a little bit deeper. Obviously, one of the challenges with data is that granular aspect, right? And so, as a business leader, we struggle with, there's 2 sides of the same coin. On the one hand, obviously, the more you have granular data and the more inputs and the more information, the more power, because who knows when something's going to make a difference or drive a different analytical perspective or answer or what have you. But then on the other hand, we see constant issue where if you have too many mandatory fields or too many inputs, that it really just paralyzes your team and they just stop using your CRM or your ERP or whatever system. They just stop doing it. And that doesn't mean they're not doing the right activities and doing amazing work and getting amazing results, but they're just no longer willing to input the data because it's too hard. And so the most classic example, I think, which kind of alludes to your case study, is actually when it comes to sales, because, in today's world, like if you have gender as a required, it could be like, oh my gosh, this, if I get this wrong, it's illegal. And so then they're scared to even put the person in because they're like, I don't know their pronoun, I don't know their gender. So therefore I can't even complete this form because I don't have the required inputs, right? And so then they don't put it in. And then as they proceed with great work and great activities and results, they never backtrack and put it in. So you end up with like a sale that's amazing and it wasn't tracked and the data's not there and everyone's doing the right thing, but they're not putting the data in for reasonable reasons. So how do you balance that in your clients and help people navigate that? Because some of that data is critical to eventually making good decisions, but it's not laziness or attitude that's stopping people. It's truly not having the actual answer when it's applicable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic example because you're right, it happens all the time. The way I approach it, the way I would suggest anyone should approach it is, first of all, you kind of start where you are. So we all have fields in our CRMs where you're right, not fully filled in for valid reasons. It's okay to pull that data out. Because again, if we're stepping back and we're answering the right questions, giving the right answers, we may have answers that are partially incomplete, and that in itself is an answer. So if we as an executive team have identified questions, and now we know the answers we need, and we can't get part of that answer, then as a management team, we'll see, like, why do we not know the gender on 80% of our customers? Well, because no one's entering it because of one or two of those edge cases. So maybe as managers, we're like, okay, we don't have it now, but let's actually tell the sales team, look, you still have to fill it in unless, in this example, you don't know the gender, and maybe you don't, like 80% would be high. If we look at the data and it's like, you know what, we don't know the gender of 7% of the people, that's fine. But again, it's always in the context of answering the questions. And and your point is well taken, because quite often in business intelligence, the first thing people say is way too much work, right? Capturing all this data will take too long. We go the opposite way and say, well, what data do you have? And how can we answer questions that are relevant with what you have? And that way, if we can't answer a question that's important to you because we don't have the data, it changes the focus. And if the question is valid and truly important to a strategic outcome, now as business leaders, we have to find a way to answer that question. Or else something's wrong with our strategy. Right? If I need to know X to accomplish Y, and we can't answer X because of these reasons, then I still need to know X to accomplish Y. So now the issue becomes, how can we answer X? Maybe we don't have gender. Do we really need gender to cross-sell? Maybe not in that case study, right? So again, it makes the discussion around the communication, not thou shalt do this so that we have the data. It's what do we need to accomplish as a company, and how can what we have accomplish that and help us?
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, one of the things that we look at with clients and even within Amplify is, trying to start backwards first. So, okay, if we're going to make this particular field mandatory, what questions are we going to be asking that require this to be mandatory? What reports are we going to be using to answer questions and or take action that makes this a mandatory field? And if we can't understand that, but we still think it might be an important field, then there's always the opportunity to leave it as an optional field, but not a required field. And really, like, having stringent thought process as to what is mandatory, because the reality is, I mean, if you have too many mandatory, and then people, well, they wait till Friday to input all their data, and then guess what happens on Friday? Steve calls and has a happy hour invite, which is a hell of a lot more compelling than filling in your week's worth of data. And then next thing you know, you don't have data, but you still have great activity, great work being done. So I think, restricting how much is mandatory and being clear, so that the whole, going back to communication, so that everyone that is putting in mandatory data actually knows how that's going to eventually help them, hopefully them, and if not them, at least help the business, right? And then they're a lot more compelled to have those mandatory fields and do the digging or the work to fill them in. But if they don't understand why it's mandatory, it paralyzes them, and it's quick, it's very quick to want to push off, right?
Absolutely right. And it's about communication, and it's enabling. So you're right, someone who has to spend too much time entering fields that we're not going to use isn't going to come alongside. So well said.
Yeah, no, for sure. So similarly, want to talk a bit about perfection, and you used the word, I think, neutralizer, and sometimes their goal is kind of perfection, is a lot of times the angle that they'll neutralize, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's a challenge, because for many reasons, going back to the point we just made, if you have bad inputs, then you're going to have a lack of perfection on the other side. But how do you help your clients balance that strong desire for perfection. And we obviously have a lot of CPAs on the call today, and they are especially guilty, and I'm allowed to say it because I am one and you're one, so we can say it. They're especially guilty of like aiming for perfection, right? But if you aim for perfection, you can often get nowhere, and you don't answer questions and you don't take action. So how do you balance that with your clients in terms of like trying to get accurate, timely data, trying to get as close to perfect as you can, but recognizing that perfect is probably a goal that you're never going to hit?
Right. And it's so good question if I ever asked that. It's kind of the first step is we try to come up with sort of an assessment of how wrong can we be and still be useful. So like in the case study, if we're identifying customers and what categories aren't they buying, if the sales number is out by 5 or 10%, we want to be perfect. But if it's a matter of getting the information out, we'd probably be okay with that, because the issue is still your salesperson needs to be talking to this customer and selling them these other two products. So we kind of come up with, in some cases, the margin for error is next to nothing. That's a different situation, but it's usually from a tactical perspective, from an operational perspective, from a giving information and answers to the doers. Their requirement for perfection is usually far less than what ours is as accountants, because we have a psychological want for perfection, whereas the doer is actually, there's just give me the information. I'll pick steel, case in point, I did some work for a company in the US that sells chain and slings for the lifting industry, like for cranes and stuff. Didn't really know that was an industry, but it is. And so perfect example is, they were discovering that a lot of clients were buying slings, but not chains, and the owner's like, well, that makes no sense. If Steve is buying sling from us, why the heck isn't he buying good American chain, as the owner said, right? And so it didn't matter if he was buying $5,000 of slings or $10,000. The fact that the chain number was 0 was what the issue was. But yet the accountant would have been like, I need to know that the actual sling number is 7, not 5. But the issue actually is, what aren't we not selling? So again, it's the question we're trying to ask, right? We're trying to get a doer to accomplish something, and it's often we want them to do something that's not present. And so therefore, the perfection of what is present is less important than identifying what they need to do, what they're stepping toward. I hope that's not too meta, too esoteric.
No, I think that makes sense, actually. Like, just to repeat, it's what's not being done or what's not present that often is the driving of action. And so, right. That the perfection doesn't even hold a lot of value. And I think a couple of things that we talk about is, consistency. So if you're measuring and analyzing and questioning and answering the same numbers that are always measured the same, and there's a consistency as to how it's recorded, when it's reported, and how it's measured, then there's room for error within that, because you would still see trends, you still can drive action, and it's probably by and large accurate enough to meet its purpose. And so I think that's often, even with KPIs, right? People get paralyzed because they're like, well, should we include unutilized time, for example, for professional services in the cost of good, or should we put it below the line? I mean, the right answer is just always treat it the same. That's answer number one. And then if you start using the data and taking action, then you can get a little bit more perfect over time, because you actually can see the flaws in that way that you're measuring it or reporting it, right? But again, people seem to get paralyzed on what's the exact best practice and the exact way to do it. But the reality is the trend is going to show itself, even if you're using numbers that are less than perfect, right? Like, I mean, obviously, a trend on numbers that are total bullshit is a different thing. But that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about largely true, largely accurate, but absolutely not perfect. And so you need that opportunity often.
And it's a fantastic point, because when I was talking about getting a good answer that's when we need it to make a decision, and so we can meet the decision frequency. That's exactly what it is. Often we'll become paralyzed in exactly that endless, and it makes logical sense. If we sat around as a management team, like, okay, well, let's measure these KPIs, we are going to have endless debate over what should go into them, right? To your example of whether we use unutilized time or not. When you sort of step it back and say, what question are we trying to answer here? It smooths the waters. In a lot of cases, it's like, you know what? Consistency is what's important. To your example, we leave unutilized time in or out, doesn't matter as long as it's in or out consistently every single time. Now we've got that to measure against. We can always change the definition later, but we don't want to change the definition that's not intentional. The example I often use is, turkey stuffing, right? Everyone's got their own. It's basically the same thing. It's breadcrumbs and onions and stuff that you put in the bird or you put in the oven, but yet no one's stuffing turkey dressing tastes the same. Well,
Right.
why is that, right? I mean, we use the same recipe my mother-in-law uses, and hers tastes different than mine. Well, like, how is that possible? There's because she consistently does it the same way, even though it's slightly different than how we do it, even though we kind of think it's the same. Maybe it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of seasonal. We're kind of coming up on Christmas. You can use that analogy.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. Um, Another thing that you talked about a bit, but I just want to dig into a little deeper is, and just to frame your three step framework. So the questions, what you're indicating is to some degree the questions and the answers are paired, and like, sorry, the
Yes.
questions and the action are paired, right? And so the idea is you're asking a question with direct ideas of what action you're going to take
Right.
with that answer. Yeah. And so, because a lot of times you'll see, and again, CPAs very guilty of it, engineers quite guilty because they love numbers that don't have dollar signs in front of them, right? But there's a lot of discussion of numbers that are literally discussion of numbers. And of course, as a recovering CPA, I guess, because I obviously nobody lets me practice anymore as a CPA. But so as a business owner and a business leader that is no longer in an accounting or finance function, it's especially apparent to me when people are talking numbers, but it's like, okay, that's great. But what's the trend? What's the forecasting? What's the actions we're going to take? What's the risk? Like,
Yes.
I don't really care about the number. I need to know what we are being driven from by the fact that we're looking at the number. And
Yes.
oftentimes, people will report numbers, and I don't know if they think that the actions and the trends and the risks are obvious, of which they might be to a highly numeric, like a person that's great at numbers. It could be that they just think the rest is a fill in the blank logic, or if they just don't think that way. I'm not sure, but I think that it takes the credibility of that analytics down when you're not showing that action. So how do you get your clients to constantly think about, what is the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? And frame their questions so that something comes from it, right?
Yeah, and it's, again, it's a great point, because it's interesting when a company gets excited about business intelligence, when they kind of make that decision. And I've been burnt by this early on in my career, so that's why when I talk about this framework, I'm so passionate about it. An executive team will get excited and they'll start saying, like, man, I want to know this, I want to love to know that. And if you're involved, you get excited, like, yeah, we can get that in the data, we can get this, and then you end up with this dashboard that never gets used. And it's because we didn't link the question to the action. And that's why that three-step, that question branching, that first step, because the first question is usually easier. Then you go a little deeper and it's like, okay, how does that relate to the short-term tactical goals? And then it's defining it so it drives action. And it kind of, that process enforces the discipline, because without it, it's too easy to come up with a number. And the person who creates the number always thinks it makes sense, or we wouldn't let it go, right? We're all conscientious. So not a single one of us would provide any sort of dashboard, Excel report, graph to anybody that we knew was misleading. So when we give it to somebody, in our mind, it's like, that makes sense. Like, they're going to look at this and they're going to instantly know what they need to do. Well, the fact is they don't, because What's in our mind as the doer from that communication perspective is something different. They're coming at it from what am I, and they'll actually say, right? Here's this. Well, what am I supposed to do with that? You'll actually see people say that in a business. And that is their cry for help, that you haven't linked it to the action, because they're not saying that to be difficult. They're literally like, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't know. Like, what is this even telling me? That's another dead giveaway. You give something to somebody, and they're like, what is this telling me? You have failed at the communication side of BI because you haven't linked the question to the action. And that's that third one. And I'd say that gives you these weird looking, ugly questions. But they're worded that way for a reason, because there's no way that in our case study, there's no way for somebody to say, I don't know what I should do with that. Look, here's 50 customers. Here's what they're not buying by category. Like, anyone who's got a reasonable expectation of, or reasonable level of conscientiousness in our company would instantly know, like, oh, I should call them or email them, versus, hey, here's a chart showing that customer A is not buying across all. Like, it just, and I'm passionate about that framework because it actually forces these issues out early on. Without them, we end up doing a bunch of rework, right? You may have that example as well, where it's experience where someone runs off, does some analysis, comes back with a report. Someone looks at it and says, oh, can you look at this and this and this? Usually happens, used to happen when we used to have to go to the IT team to have them write SQL queries, pull data out of the database, and it was all great. And then someone would ask a question, and it's like, now I got to go pull another query, right? And so again, that issue is that rework is a symptom of we haven't, and it's our fault as the people running business intelligence project or leading the business intelligence project as executives. We have failed in our communication path because we didn't do that step of what's the action we're trying to drive, right? What's the thing we're trying to move toward? And then we end up doing this rework. Do the report, do it again. Someone still has a question, do it again. And now we're in this cycle of feeling like we're seeking answers, and we're on the defense now as managing the BI project, because it's like now we feel like this marionette. Someone's asking questions, we run away, we scurry, come back, stick our head up like a gopher, go down again, do it. And it's not a good, that's why BI projects go late. That's why they cost too much money. That's why people don't use them, because it's not linked to the action. If you identify the action, getting the question right, and then you answer that properly and timely and take away the alternate interpretations, the only thing that can happen is someone can either take the action, or they can say, you know what, we got it wrong, which is possible. That's not the question we should have been asking as executives, but it's a whole different discussion. The BI has done its work and answered it. So that's why we spend so much time on that part of it. And when we do it with clients, it's like a full half day, full day session. Like that's where the money gets made in business intelligence, is right there, getting the question right and linking it to action.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
literally, if you get that right, you literally can use Excel or like a whiteboard. That's your BI project sometimes. That's all that's needed if you get the questions right.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense for sure. If anyone has more questions, let me know. Otherwise, I've got three more to ask you, Steve, before we let you go.
Yeah,
So
sure thing.
one of the questions I had, I mean, I think that what you're saying about sometimes it's as simple as a whiteboard, sometimes it's as simple as Excel, and that oftentimes people drive into the answers before they talk about questions, and then part of the answers is, what sexy software is out there, et cetera, et cetera. So everything about that, 100% agree. I've seen it a zillion times in my own act, in Amplify, and in many, many, many clients. And you got to step back. So it's a really great reminder for everyone listening that, the answer doesn't hide magically in the software. And sometimes it can be very, very simple. And the question is the absolute first point, which we often skip. Having said all of that, you also spoke a lot about the timeliness of analytics being, and that reoccurring ability to answer the same questions over and over again and take reoccurring actions and just build it into the blood and just the being of your business. Obviously, at that point, software and technology can make a massive difference, right? Because building the same spreadsheet or getting everyone in the same room for a whiteboard is not in any way scalable. But at the same time, until you do it a couple times, it probably is more than sufficient, and get your ball rolling before you lean into the software, which, to your point, people I'll do the second before the first. So with that software, I mean, there's so much going on. Obviously, we're a NetSuite provider and a NetSuite user. So we, what I love about that is that my ops manager is so quick when it comes to reports. I ask for a report, I get it 3 minutes later. Oftentimes I do what you literally just described, where I'm like, oh, actually, can you revisit? I asked for the wrong thing. Then I revisit what I asked for. And some of those reports I use once and realize, okay, that's interesting, that's information, but it's not something I'm gonna need to use over and over again. And then other times we build it into like our actual dashboards or our actual analytics, and it drives reoccurring behavior. So the fact that I have access to a system and a person that can give me those things fast has changed our business and made it much more profitable, which is amazing. So, that's one example. I know we have a client. I was trying to get the CFO to give me some info, but I didn't catch him, I guess. But we have a client, Chata, that does AI. And so, they're really AI when it comes to data analytics, which is kind of cool. And it's almost a case of get the question right. And then the AI can, do that middle step almost entirely on its own, which is pretty remarkable how that's all coming along. And most of us have seen, maybe not business intelligence or data analytics when it comes to ChatGPT, but it doesn't take a big imagination to extrapolate how that's going to work. So just wanted to hear your point of view on technology. Once you're at a point where you've got the good questions, the actions, and it's worth it being reoccurring and fast and timely, what are you seeing in technology that can make a big difference here?
So it's going to be kind of maybe a strange answer, because I am largely technology agnostic. And at one point I wasn't. I would have told you, you know what, Tableau is the way to go. And I mean, I use Power BI a lot, but it doesn't matter. And we've worked with companies that have all sorts of different softwares, including NetSuite, because what matters is that framework. And what's neat about that, again, not to sound like a broken record, but whatever the BI is today is not going to be the BI of next year or 2 years from now or 5 years from now. What's going to remain constant is making sure the BI can do the stuff. AI is fantastic, but we still have to ask it the right question, right? And we still have to tell it who needs to see that. I mean, there's whole prompt engineering in ChatGPT is all about giving it that scenario. I'm a marketing VP. I want to know this, and then ChatGPT will work and give you some ideas. Right. So again, we still have to be, as humans, the human side of BI will never go away. And so what I love about the technology space is all the tools are getting better and faster and more AI driven, but we still have to let them know what's important to us. So until we replace ourselves as execs with AI, the only people that can actually answer the questions of what's important to us are us. And so we'll always have to sort of be one step ahead of our BI, whatever that tech is. I'm finding more and more, like even recently, I mean, Excel recently even went public preview with Python inside Excel, which was, if you're a data nerd like me, huge win. You still have to know how to code Python. Yeah, you can use ChatGPT to do it, but it's still only going to give the answer that you want from it. So you still need to know or figure out the answer. And so I think that's going to be more and more important as the AI gets busier and busier, faster and faster, and the tools get better and better.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Another question. So I don't know if you run into clients where they have immense amount of data, like we just talked about, and they're more struggling with, I should be using this data, but they don't actually know how or why to use the data. And one could argue based on your framework that, you're starting at the wrong spot and you need to step back and think about your questions and your actions, etc., and not worry about what data you have. But obviously, the business leader and the business owner has this guilt, like they'll open their latest app and it's got all these pre-programmed dashboards and pre-programmed data, and you're like, probably should be doing something with that, but and but it's not necessarily actually driven based on your framework. And so how do you consult with them and and calm their need to do more and more and more and actually narrow it into the priorities that you were talking about?
That's kind of the $1 million question. And so I'll give you 2 examples. One, 3 years ago, a client was very much of it. We had all this data. It was actually a UK client. They were spending £3 million a month in Google search and Facebook ads. So like millions of rows of data, B2C. They had all this data. They wanted to use it. So obviously we said, okay, well, let's figure out what you're actually trying to answer. Because with that much data and that much coming at you every single day, what do you really want to know? So again, we went down that path. Around the same time, another client came that was an insurtech, also in the UK for some reason, had all sorts of data as well, millions of rows of data. And they said exactly that. Well, we have all this data. We need to do something with it. We need to monetize it, right? And I couldn't convince them to sort of put the process in place. And they're like, we just want to pay you to like crunch on our data. And we actually told them like, I can't help you. Like I can, I said, but I'm just going to waste your money. So we had this discussion. I actually remember telling them like, if you want to pay me simply to explore your data, totally fine. Know that that's what you're doing. And I actually finally got them around to the point where they realized that would just be a big waste of money. Like we don't really know what we're trying to do with it. And so my approach is when a company comes to me, wants to do something with data, I'm like, perfect, we can get there. Here's how you do it. And we actually sit down and draw out the 3 circles. And I say, so step 1 of our data journey is let's do this session with your exec team. And you'll actually, and I want people who are listening to understand this, you'll physically see the executive like, oh, I didn't realize it's that easy. It's like, yes, it is that easy because there's all this hype. And you're right, our software comes at us and hey, here's the dashboard, buy this new module, have this AI piece, use this new software, and it creates all this. It's like a whole bunch of stress in our mind. And we know we want to do something with data and we have all this pressure and we think it's this huge thing. And when you actually just tell somebody, take a breath, here's how we approach it, here's how we take the first steps, you'll physically see them like, oh, yeah, we can do this. We can be data driven. This is great. And what I love about it is this approach is very internal and specific to an individual company, which A means it's going to do what's right for the company, but even better, because it's internal, their competitors won't actually see this happening. So from a competitive advantage, they're not becoming data driven with like big trumpets saying, hey, we're data driven. They're kind of flying below the radar until their competitors like, why are they stripping market share? Like, what the heck are they doing? And they can't find what they're doing because it's not like they suddenly spiked their ad sales or anything. So it wins on so many levels when we just take that step back and say, okay, there's a process. We'll get to the answers. It's only step 2, so we just got one step in front of it. And then they realize, yeah, okay, that's value there. Let's figure that out. And then it also streamlines it because if they just want to get started with data driven, they'll tend to think they need every KPI. I need to know same store sales. I need to know year over year sales. I need to know this. I need to know that. Maybe, but remember, if you're only trying to answer a specific subset of questions, you don't need all the information. And again, I alluded to the data lake concept earlier on. And it is a real thing because there's all sorts of people talk, oh, you have all these data sets. What you need to do now is smash into a data warehouse, make a data lake, throw it all in there. You can use it later. You can throw AI at it. Yes, you can, but that's just going to become a data swamp because if you just throw data into a data lake, it becomes a data swamp because there's no data lineage. Where did it come from? What's the data governance? Like who's making sure the data comes out? So there's all these issues that, oh, if we just take step back, process the framework, we probably don't need a data lake. What we actually need is an S3 bucket in Amazon or a OneDrive folder or a SharePoint folder where we're going to put some core data, and that's how we're going to drive our business forward. So it really de-risks, it de-stresses, and it makes it much more of a doable journey instead of this big event. Like BI is a process. It's not, okay, we did BI, woo, we're excited now. It's like, well, no, like you are doing BI. Once you start doing BI, you're always doing BI. Like it's not, BI isn't something you do or achieve. And so again, it's that approach just makes it, 3 months from now, we're going to have different questions. We're going to have different actions. We're going to have a new tactical goal. Great. The answers will change then. Maybe the data we need to pull in will change then. but it's 1, 2, 3 steps, but it's drawn as a cycle for a reason, because we just keep running it over and over, and then the business stair steps in its BI journey. 18 months from now, it's going to have that what it did 18 months ago. It's going to have all sorts of other new stuff that are all intentional and used for a reason, instead of trying to jump from 0 to there. Well, you'll get there in 18 months, but you can't go from here to there without blowing yourself up and having a BI project that fails. You just can't.
Yeah. Well, I love it. We are out of time. I have more questions, but the clock has cut me off. So we will honor that 1:30 end. Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate it. I think you've driven home a lot of important points that people can take action from. So thank you so much for that. For our members, just a friendly reminder, we've got cyber coming in November, 3rd Tuesday, very important topic, obviously. You don't want that data getting hacked, because that would be a whole new story. And then in January, we're doing indirect tax, because obviously that applies to all our businesses. So the business owners and finance leaders need to know what's happening in that area. We have a live event October 26th that is quickly running out of seats. So please sign up if you're interested in that. And don't forget to check out Lively Entrepreneurial Talks with Amplify, where Jesse and I chat about all things business. The latest is actually on startups, and then we go through the Amplify story, because happy birthday to us. It's been 5 years in October. And so we celebrate that with our Let's, and we hope that you enjoy that story. Every time I walk out of the studio, I think we shouldn't have said so much. It was too vulnerable, too much disclosure. So all of the secrets come in at the 30-minute mark over the hour podcast. So you have to listen to the whole thing to get all the secrets. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, our AHA members. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for the invite. We'll see you later, everyone.